There comes a moment in every narcissistic relationship when you stop asking, how do I make them understand? And start asking, how do I make them stop? Because if you've ever dealt with a narcissist, you already know that explaining yourself doesn't work. Defending yourself doesn't work. Arguing doesn't work. Proving your innocence doesn't work. The more evidence you bring, the more they twist it. The more kindness you show, the more they exploit it. The more chances you give, the more they take. And eventually you realize something that changes everything. The problem was never that they didn't understand your boundaries. The problem was that they never believed you would enforce them. That realization is where your power begins. Most people spend years trying to find the perfect words to stop a narcissist from hurting them. They replay conversations in their minds. They imagine stronger responses. They think that if they could just explain themselves one more time, present 1 month, piece of evidence, or make one more emotional appeal, the narcissist would finally understand. But what they don't realize is that understanding was never the issue. The narcissist heard you the first time. They understood your pain the first time. They recognized your boundaries the first time. The problem was never a lack of communication. The problem was a lack of consequences. That is the truth that changes everything. A narcissist does not measure your words. They measure your willingness to tolerate what follows those words. They watch what happens after you say you are hurt. They watch what happens after you say you deserve respect. They watch what happens after you say you have reached your limit. If nothing changes after those statements, then those words become meaningless in their eyes. They learn that your boundaries are suggestions instead of standards. They learn that your warnings are temporary emotions instead of permanent decisions. They learn that no matter what they still maintain access to your attention, your energy, your forgiveness, and your presence. That is why the most powerful response is never an argument. It is a boundary. Arguments keep you trapped in their world. Boundaries bring you back to your own. An argument says, please understand why I am upset. A boundary says, whether you understand or not, this behavior is unacceptable. An argument seeks permission. A boundary exercises authority. An argument gives the other person the power to approve or reject your reality. A boundary does not require approval from anyone. This is where most people make a devastating mistake. They believe boundaries are words. They believe a boundary is something you announce. But a boundary without action is simply a wish. A boundary without enforcement is simply a request. A boundary without consequences is simply noise. Real boundaries are not spoken. They are demonstrated. Anyone can say they deserve respect. Few people are willing. To leave situations where respect is absent. Anyone can say they value themselves. Few people are willing to disappoint others in order to protect themselves. Anyone can say they have standards. Few people are willing to enforce those standards when enforcement becomes uncomfortable. That is why boundaries are so powerful. They reveal whether your self-respect is real or merely theoretical. The narcissist depends on one thing above all else. They depend on your willingness to stay in the cycle. They depend on your willingness to keep explaining, keep defending, keep hoping, and keep waiting for change. Every argument becomes another opportunity for them to regain control. Every emotional reaction becomes another source of validation. Every attempt to convince them becomes proof that they still occupy space in your mind. The moment you stop arguing, something remarkable happens. The game begins to collapse. Suddenly there is no emotional fuel. Suddenly there is no endless debate. Suddenly there is no audience for the manipulation. Suddenly there is no participation. And without participation, their usual strategies become ineffective. That is why calmness becomes so threatening to a narcissist. Not because it is loud, not because it is dramatic, but because it signals independence. A calm person is no longer seeking permission to exist. A calm person is no longer begging to be understood. A calm person is no longer negotiating their worth. A calm person has already made a decision. There is incredible power in reaching a point where your actions speak louder than your pain. When you stop explaining why you deserve respect and simply remove yourself from disrespectful situations, you send a message stronger than any speech ever could. When you stop trying to convince someone to value you and instead value yourself enough to walk away, you create a shift they cannot ignore. When you stop proving your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding, You reclaim the energy that was being wasted on a battle designed for you to lose. The strongest people are not the ones who have mastered confrontation. They are the ones who have mastered detachment, because detachment removes the narcissist's greatest weapon, control. Control requires access. Control requires emotional investment. Control requires participation. The moment you withdraw those things, the balance of power changes. Many people fear boundaries because they believe boundaries create conflict. But the truth is that boundaries reveal conflict that already exists. The disrespect was already there. The manipulation was already there. The imbalance was already there. The boundary simply shines a light on it. And once that light appears, pretending becomes impossible. This is why narcissists often react aggressively when boundaries are enforced. Not because the boundary is unreasonable, but because the boundary threatens their access. For years, they married. I have benefited from unlimited access to your emotions, unlimited access to your time, unlimited access to your forgiveness, unlimited access to your energy. A boundary closes the door they assumed would always remain open, and nothing exposes entitlement faster than hearing the word no. The moment you stop rewarding bad behavior with continued access, the entire relationship dynamic begins to change. You discover something that many people never learn. You do not need another person's cooperation to protect your peace. You do not need their agreement. You do not need their understanding. You do not need their validation. You only need your decision. That decision becomes the foundation of personal power. Because power is not forcing someone else to change. Power is refusing to sacrifice yourself while waiting for them to change. Power is choosing your well-being over their approval. Power is choosing your dignity over temporary comfort. Power is choosing truth over illusion. For too long, many people confuse endurance with strength. They think strength means staying longer, tolerating more, forgiving faster, giving endless chances. But true strength often looks very different. True strength is recognizing when enough is enough. True strength is refusing to abandon yourself in order to maintain a relationship. True strength is protecting your peace even when others accuse you of being selfish. True strength is understanding that your value does not decrease because someone fails to appreciate it. The moment that truth settles into your heart, everything changes. You stop chasing respect. You start requiring it. You stop arguing for your worth. You start living from it. You stop asking others to honor your boundaries. You start honoring them yourself. And that is the moment a narcissist encounters something they never expected. A person who no longer needs permission to protect themselves. A person who no longer fears walking away. A person who no longer mistakes endless patience for love. A person who finally understands that the strongest response to disrespect is not a louder argument, a sharper comeback, or a more convincing explanation. It is the unwavering boundary of someone who knows exactly what they will and will not accept. One of the most dangerous lies people believe is that anger is power. They think that if they can finally unleash everything they have been holding inside, if they can finally tell the narcissist exactly what they think, if they can finally make their pain visible, they will regain control of the situation. But what most people never realize is that a narcissist is often completely comfortable with your anger. In fact, many of them prefer it. Your anger keeps you emotionally connected. Your anger keeps you engaged. Your anger proves that they still have the ability to affect your emotions. Every emotional reaction becomes evidence that they still occupy valuable space inside your mind. That is why indifference is so much more powerful than anger. Anger says, you still have access to my emotions. Indifference says, you no longer have access to me. And those are two completely different realities. A narcissist can work with anger. They can manipulate anger. They can provoke anger. They can use your anger against you. They can point to your frustration and call you unstable. They can point to your reaction and ignore their behavior. They can create chaos and then blame you for the explosion. This is why so many victims eventually find themselves apologizing for reactions that were caused by months or years of emotional abuse. The narcissist shifts the focus away from their actions and onto your response. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about the lies. It is about your tone. It is no longer about the betrayal. It is about your reaction. It is no longer about the disrespect. It is about your frustration. And just like that, they regain control. Control of the narrative. But indifference changes everything. Indifference refuses to participate in the performance. Indifference refuses to fight battles that lead nowhere. Indifference refuses to chase explanations from people committed to misunderstanding them. Indifference is not weakness. It is emotional mastery. It is the moment you stop allowing someone else's behavior to determine your inner state. Most people misunderstand indifference. They think it means you no longer feel pain. They think it means you no longer care. They think it means you become cold, distant, or emotionless. That is not true at all. Real indifference is not the absence of emotion. It is the absence of emotional dependence. You no longer depend on their approval to feel valuable. You no longer depend on their apology to heal. You no longer depend on their validation to feel worthy. No longer depend on their understanding to know your truth. That is freedom. Because as long as your peace depends on someone else's behavior, your peace is not really yours. The narcissist's greatest source of power comes from convincing you that your emotional state depends on them. They want you to celebrate when they approve of you. They want you devastated when they reject you. They want you anxious when they withdraw. They want you relieved when they return. They want your emotional world revolving around their choices. The moment you stop revolving around them, their power begins to disappear. Think about how much energy people waste trying to change the opinions of those who have already decided not to see them clearly. They write long messages. They rehearse conversations. They gather evidence. They defend themselves against accusations that were never based on facts. They fight desperately for understanding. Meanwhile, the narcissist watches the entire performance knowing they have already succeeded, because your focus remains on them. Your attention remains on them. Your emotional energy remains on them. Your life remains organized around them. Indifference breaks that cycle. Indifference redirects that energy back where it belongs, back to your goals, back to your growth, back to your healing, back to your future. The moment you stop trying to change a narcissist's perception of you, you gain time, energy, and clarity that were previously trapped inside a losing battle. And that battle is always losing because the narcissist benefits from confusion. They benefit from uncertainty. They benefit from keeping you trapped inside endless analysis. The more time you spend trying to understand their contradictions, the less time you spend building your own life. That is why indifference becomes a form of self-respect. You stop making them the center of your story. You stop giving them the leading role in your emotional life. You stop treating their opinions as if they determine your value. You stop handing them authority they never do. Served, this is where true power emerges, not when they change, not when they apologize, not when they finally recognize your worth, but when none of those things are required for you to move forward. Because the strongest version of you is not waiting for closure. The strongest version of you creates closure. The strongest version of you understands that some people will never admit what they did. Some people will never take responsibility. Some people will never validate your experience. Some people will never become who you hoped they would be. And yet you move forward anyway. That is strength. That is freedom. That is emotional independence. A narcissist expects you to remain emotionally available forever. They expect their words to affect you. They expect their opinions to influence you. They expect their presence or absence to control you. Nothing confuses them more than discovering that they no longer have that influence, because influence was always the Goa. Control was always the goal. Access was always the goal. And indifference quietly removes all three, without drama, without revenge, without conflict, without permission. The narcissist may continue talking, they may continue criticizing, they may continue provoking, but something has changed. You are no longer emotionally available for the game. And that realization creates a level of power that arguments can never produce. Arguments keep you connected. Indifference sets you free. Arguments keep you focused on the past. Indifference allows you to build the future. Arguments keep you seeking justice from people incapable of giving it. Indifference allows you to create peace without their participation. That is why the narcissist fears indifference more than anger, because anger means they still matter. Indifference means they no longer control the direction of your life. And there is nothing more powerful than reaching the moment when someone who once had the ability to ruin your entire day suddenly loses the ability to ruin even a single minute. There is nothing more powerful than realizing that your happiness no longer rises and falls based on their approval. There is nothing more powerful than understanding that your confidence no longer depends on their opinion. There is nothing more powerful than waking up one day and discovering that the person who once occupied your thoughts every hour has become irrelevant to your future. Because the highest level of healing is not when you hate them. The highest level of healing is not when you defeat them. The highest level of healing is not when you finally prove them wrong. The highest level of healing is when you stop needing anything from them at all. When their approval means nothing. When their criticism means nothing. When their manipulation means nothing. When their absence means nothing. When their presence means nothing. When your peace becomes stronger than their influence. When your purpose becomes bigger than their drama. When your future becomes more important than your wounds. When your life finally becomes too valuable to waste on people who only felt powerful when they convinced you that your value depended on them. Greatest mistake people make when dealing with a narcissist is believing that the final victory comes when the narcissist finally understands their value. They spend months, sometimes years, trying to prove their worth to someone who has already decided to overlook it. They work harder, love harder, forgive more, tolerate more, sacrifice more, and hope that eventually their loyalty, patience, and kindness will be recognized. But the painful truth is that many narcissists are fully aware of your value. They benefit from your value. They depend on your value. What they do not want is for you to fully recognize your own value, because the moment you do, their control begins to disappear. That is why freedom begins the moment you stop focusing on what they think about you and start focusing on what you think about yourself. For too long, many people hand over the keys to their self-worth without realizing it. They allow another person's opinions to become the measuring stick for their confidence. When the narcissist praises them, they feel worthy. When the narcissist criticizes them, they feel broken. When the narcissist gives attention, they feel important. When the narcissist withdraws affection, they feel abandoned. Their entire emotional world becomes dependent on the unpredictable behavior of someone who was never qualified to determine their value in the first place. That is one of the most dangerous traps a person can fall into. Because when someone else controls your self-worth, they control your decisions. They control your emotions. They control your boundaries. They control your future. The narcissist understands this better than most people realize. They know that a confident person is difficult to manipulate. A person who knows their worth does not chase breadcrumbs. A person who knows their worth does not tolerate constant disrespect. A person who knows their worth does not remain trapped in relationships that require self-betrayal. That is why narcissists often work so hard to create confusion. They create uncertainty because uncertainty weakens confidence. They create self-doubt because self-doubt increases dependence. They create emotional chaos because chaos makes control easier. The moment you begin trusting your own judgment again, their influence starts to weaken. The moment you stop asking them to define reality for you, their power starts to fade. The moment you stop seeking permission to feel valuable, everything changes. True freedom begins when you understand a life-changing truth. Your value is not something another person gives you. Your value is something you already possess. No opinion can increase it. No criticism can decrease it. No rejection can raise it. No betrayal can destroy it. No manipulation can remove it. The narcissist wants you to believe that your value is conditional. They want you to believe that you must constantly earn approval. They want you to believe that acceptance is something awarded only when you meet their expectations. This creates a cycle where you are always performing, always proving, always striving, always chasing validation that never fully arrives. And the reason it never fully arrives is because the chase itself serves their interests. As long as you are chasing validation, you remain distracted from your own power. As long as you are seeking approval, you remain vulnerable to rejection. As long as you are asking for permission, you remain dependent. The breakthrough occurs when you stop playing that game entirely. When you finally understand that your worth existed before they entered your life. It existed during the relationship. It exists after the relationship, and it will continue. Existing whether they recognize it or not. That realization is transformational because suddenly you stop negotiating with people who consistently disrespect you. You stop explaining boundaries to people who repeatedly violate them. You stop defending yourself against accusations designed to control you. You stop proving things that should never have required proof. You stop shrinking yourself to make someone else comfortable. You stop carrying responsibilities that never belong to you. For many people, this is the first taste of genuine freedom they have ever experienced. Not freedom because circumstances changed. Not freedom because the narcissist changed. Freedom because they changed. Freedom because they finally stopped abandoning themselves. One of the most powerful moments in a person's life occurs when they realize that they are no longer willing to pay for connection with their self-respect. For years, they may have accepted treatment that violated their value. S, because they feared losing the relationship. They feared rejection. They feared loneliness. They feared abandonment. But eventually, a new fear emerges, the fear of losing themselves. And that fear becomes stronger than every other fear. Because there comes a point where staying costs more than leaving. There comes a point where silence costs more than speaking. There comes a point where tolerating disrespect becomes more painful than confronting it. And when that point arrives, transformation becomes unavoidable. The narcissist may not understand what changed. They may not recognize the shift immediately, but they feel it. They feel the difference when their criticism no longer destroys your confidence. They feel the difference when their manipulation no longer creates confusion. They feel the difference when their approval no longer determines your happiness. They feel the difference when their absence no longer creates panic, because for the first time, they are D. Ealing with someone who understands their own worth, someone who cannot be controlled through insecurity, someone who cannot be controlled through guilt, someone who cannot be controlled through fear, someone who no longer confuses attention with love, someone who no longer confuses control with connection, someone who no longer confuses survival with happiness. The strongest people are not those who never experienced manipulation. The strongest people are those who experienced it, learned from it, and refused to let it define them. They stopped seeing themselves through the eyes of the person who hurt them. They started seeing themselves through the truth that they are valuable even when misunderstood, valuable even when rejected, valuable even when criticized, valuable even when alone, valuable even when others fail to appreciate them, because worth is not determined by recognition. Diamonds remain valuable even in darkness. Gold remains valuable even when buried. Greatness remains greatness even when ignored. And human value operates the same way. The narcissist's inability to appreciate you does not reduce your significance. Their blindness does not diminish your brilliance. Their rejection does not invalidate your worth. Their criticism does not define your identity. The moment you fully accept this truth, something extraordinary happens. You stop living for their approval. You start living for your purpose. You stop focusing on what they took from you. You start focusing on what you can build. You stop measuring your future by your wounds. You start measuring it by your potential. You stop asking whether they see your value. You start asking whether you are honoring your value. And that question changes everything. Because the greatest victory over a narcissist is not making them regret losing you. The greatest victory is becoming so connected to your own worth that their opinion becomes irrelevant. The greatest. Victory is waking up every day knowing exactly who you are, exactly what you deserve, exactly what you will tolerate, and exactly what you will never accept again. The greatest victory is realizing that the freedom you searched for was never hidden inside their validation. It was waiting inside your own self-respect all along.